Joseph LaHood. I live here in Peoria, Illinois, on Park Ridge Drive.
And LaHood is spelled?
L-A, capital H-O-O-D.
And a little bit about your youth. Where did you go to school? What were you interested in?
Well, I grew up in the south end of Peoria, like a lot of us did. I went to St. Joseph grade school till third grade when they closed, transferred to St. Patrick, graduated from St. Patrick in eighth grade, went to Spalding for a year or thereabouts, and from Spalding I went to Manual Central and Woodruff. And you could say I was just having a lot of fun in high school and trying to find my way through.
4 years and 4 schools.
4 years in 4 schools and never graduated high school.
And never graduated high school?
Never graduated high school. Since then, I've gone to college. I have 2 degrees in college.
We'll get to that
Yeah,
in just a
okay,
moment.
all
When you say you went to 4 different high schools, why was that? Was your family moving, or were you just?
As I said, I was having too much fun. I was asked to leave Spalding, and from Spalding I went to Manual. Spent some time there, very brief. I was asked to leave Manual. I went to Central next, spent some time there, and from there I went to Woodruff and literally spent 3 hours in Woodruff and was asked to leave.
And so how far did you get in high school at that point?
I'm going to guess sophomore year.
So you had a couple of years over a 4-year period of time or
Yes.
so.
Yes.
And then once you left Woodruff High School in Peoria, what was next?
I joined the Marine Corps. I was 17 years old. And so I joined the Marine Corps at 17.
Was there a particular goal in mind, or was it just, I've run out of options, the Marine Corps is probably it?
I've run out of options, and the Marine Corps was it.
So you go into the Marine Corps and you go to basic training where?
Camp Pendleton, California.
And at that point, you finish basic. Does the Marine Corps have AIT like the Army?
They do.
Okay.
They do.
And so you went to AIT training?
Yes.
And that was for what?
Infantry training. It's basic infantry training is what it is. It's 6 weeks long, and basically it's done in California. Just ground pounder is what it is, just to learn what infantry training is all about. It's to learn what an infantryman does, how he lives, how he works out in the jungles, how he works out in the hills, how he carries himself, what he carries, how he survives. That's what the whole thing was about.
And then you went ahead and learned about supply?
From there I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I spent 4 weeks there learning about supply because my MOS was what they call a 3041, which was supplies. And so that's where I went.
And after Camp Lejeune, did you ship out?
No, I went to Quantico, Virginia, spent a year at Quantico. Quantico is the show place of the Marine Corps. They train officers there. So I spent a little less than a year training officers and working with officers. From there, I was transferred to Cherry Point, spent a couple of months in Cherry Point, and from there I was shipped out to Vietnam in December of 1970.
And on your orders, what were you supposed to be doing when you got to Vietnam?
Supplies, yes.
Did any of that apply when you got to country?
Very little. I had what they call a supply hut, okay, and that's where things were at in this very small place, and you did that during the daytime, and you did other things that you needed to do. Everybody was an infantryman in Vietnam when needed. And so I said 70, actually I was there in 69, I'm sorry, December of 69 is when I went to Vietnam.
And you were based where?
I started out being based at a place called LZ Ross, and it was just a little bitty hill about 35, 40 miles south of Da Nang. And it was big enough, when I say a hill, it was big enough to maybe get a half a dozen tents on that hill, and a supply hut, and maybe a few trucks, and that was about it. And it was surrounded by concertina wire. That was our perimeter.
And you eventually, I mean, you took care of the supply hut, but eventually you evolved into actually being on patrol?
Yes. Either day patrol, but primarily night patrol. Those who had daytime jobs, such as whether you're liaison or whether you're supply or armory, you would go on patrols usually at night, because your infantrymen were out there during the daytime, and so you would just augment the operation at nighttime.
Could you share with us what night patrol involved?
You'd wait until it was dark before you would go out, and usually it's 6 to 9 men that went out, and you would go to a predestined spot, and if you were going to set up an ambush, you would just sit somewhere. Usually it's in the middle of a rice paddy, and you would set up perimeters for an ambush. If it was strictly patrolling, you would go out and you would walk certain areas for 4 or 5 hours, trying to flush the enemy out.
How often did this occur? How long were you out?
Night patrol occurred every night, as long as there were people capable of doing it. And you were out anywhere till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. You would try to come back in before daylight. The idea was you didn't want the enemy to see where you were going out nor how you were coming in.
When you talk about being on a hill and just having maybe 6 tents, a supply hut, etc., how many men were based there?
Less than 200. Yeah, it was less than 200.
Were you subject to attack from Viet Cong or North Vietnamese?
Well, we were subject to attack, and that's why the concertina wire. And every night, men would be in foxholes around the perimeter of the LZ. LZ stood for a landing zone. Excuse me. So this hill was used for a helicopter landing zone. Is primarily what it was used for. But we were there to protect it and to protect the area. Is what our goal was.
What kind of attacks did you come under?
Usually it was foot soldiers coming in and or mortars. They were very good with mortars, and they would lob mortars in on us, and or, as I say, foot soldiers trying to get through the concertina wire.
Did you have to engage them on occasion?
On occasion with the concertina wire, engaging mortars, you would take cover, try to figure out where their mortars were, and then lob some back at them. Coming in through the concertina wire, they had what they call sappers, and they were individuals, small, and they could come through concertina wire without making any noise. And concertina wire, we usually had tin cans hung with rocks or marbles, or just so when they shook, they would make noises. And you'd have hundreds of these cans. And these sappers, as they call them, they could come through and not shake a can. That's how good they were at it.
And the sappers had like bandoliers?
Bandoliers of ammunition. Clothing was usually a loincloth, very tightly wrapped around their groin area. The rest of them was usually charcoal dark so that they could get through.
Were you ever injured in Vietnam?
I was never injured.
And how long did you serve there?
A year and a half total. Well, yeah, a year and a half. From December of '69 through May of '71.
So you extended.
I extended.
For a 6-month tour.
I did.
Why did you choose to do that?
When I rotated out the first time, which would have been December of 1970, if you had 18 months or less left in the Marine Corps, they were giving you an early discharge out. So I thought, well, I'd like to get an early discharge out, so therefore I re-upped to go back the second time, thinking when I would rotate out the second time I would have less than 18 months. Well, shortly thereafter, they decided they'd cut the numbers low enough, and no matter what happens, there are no more early outs. So I ended up spending another 6 months in Vietnam.
I'd like to talk about the patrols once again in terms of, was there a point in time where you, I suppose you were nervous every time you went out?
Every time.
Was there a point in time where you thought, this isn't good?
A couple of times. Times especially when we would lose contact with the rear because our radios would break down. And or we would feel like we were going to be outnumbered as we were hiding, and as we'd see Viet Cong go by, The question is, do you engage them or do you not? And if we were outnumbered, we would not engage them. If we were outnumbered, we just wanted to hold the status quo and hope they pass by. At those points in times, yes, you start wondering what's going on.
Did you lose any of your fellow men at the landing zone?
We've lost fellow men at landing zone, yes. Yes. Either because of incoming mortars and or patrols. Yes.
As you look back at that period of time, how do you think that has impacted your life as a whole?
One of the things I didn't, it took me years. I was discharged out of the Marine Corps in 1972. I was married in October of 72 and thinking life goes on as normal. And suddenly there came a time in my life shortly thereafter where I come to realize the things I saw, experienced, did, and felt would impact me the rest of my life. And not sure why, but I suddenly realized that. It has had an impact on me the rest of my life. I spent almost 14 years in therapy. I started therapy I was out of the Marine Corps in 72. I started therapy in late 73. Not knowing why I was going to therapy, I just knew something was wrong. And it took years for the right therapist to figure out why we need to go where we need to go. As most therapists, they dig into your past, especially childhood, and it's like, okay, what happened? Well, it wasn't childhood. Well, we were lost as to where we go from there. And it was a Catholic priest who was a therapist at the time who suddenly one day asked me to tell me about Vietnam. So I told him about Vietnam. And toward the end, he suddenly realized all I had was good stories. And so he looked at me and he says, so nothing bad ever happened to you? And I said, oh, no, nothing bad. And he says, we're going to walk through this. So he explained over the next period of whatever time, and it was a couple of years, we would walk through Vietnam every day. And he assured me that you're going to see things that you'd forgotten. And I, like a lot of other guys, buried everything and forgot about it.
Bad things had happened.
Bad things had happened. Okay.
You came back from Vietnam. You were married.
Yes.
Did not have a high school diploma at the time.
Did not.
So what did you do in terms of preparing yourself for the future?
Well, there's a restaurant in town called Famous Recipe Fried Chicken back then. And so I went to work there frying chicken. And one Wednesday, about a year after I started this, I decided it's time to go to school. So I went over to ICC, stood in line, and decided I'm going to go to ICC. So I had a catalog, I never forget it, and I can still remember the page number. It's page number 54, and it was computer science. And I thought, that's what I want to be. I'm going to learn about computers. So I signed up just like everybody else did. And I signed up for 21 semester hours, thinking that's full time. School starts. Partway through school, I get called into the office, and they're explaining to me that I had lied on my application. And I begged to pardon. I says, I didn't lie on the application. And they said, well, you don't have a high school degree. And I says, that is true. Well, you had to have lied. I says, I beg to pardon, I didn't lie. So they finally found my files. And they said, no, you circled 9th or 10th grade. And I says, because I'm not sure where I'm at, 9th or 10th grade, so I circled both of them. And it was a dean, and he says, so you didn't lie? And I says, no, I didn't. And he says, well, you can't stay here. And I says, why? I'm carrying 20 hours. I'm acing it. Why can't I stay here? Dialogue goes back and forth. Finally, what it came down to after a couple of meetings is, we'll allow you to stay here as long as you maintain a B. And so they allowed me to stay and receive my associate's degree in computer science as long as I maintained my B.
May I ask if you ever got a high school diploma?
Yes, a couple of years later, maybe a year later, I transferred to Bradley. And I applied to McDonnell Douglas, they had a division here in Peoria at the time. And so I put the application in McDonnell Douglas, and John Schlinker is in the man's name, and he says, Joe, you need a high school degree to get in here. I says, John, I've got an associate's. I'm working toward my undergrad. He says, you got to have a high school degree. I says, well, I'll go back and get a GED. took me 6 times before I passed my GED, but I finally passed the GED. And so that's my high school diploma. So I got an associate's first, picked up a GED, then I picked up my undergrad.
During this period of time, you're going through some sort of counseling.
A lot of counseling.
Did that impact your education at all?
It did not. No.
You were able to keep those two things separate?
Yes.
Were you burying Vietnam, do you think?
Oh yeah, I was burying Vietnam. Yeah, and that's how I kept them separate. I learned to bury things very well. I think when we go through traumatic situations, we learn to bury. That's how we survive. And so things that we went through over there, and I say we, I and a bunch of the other guys, we would bury what we didn't want to face reality with.
An example of what you were trying to bury.
Seeing other guys. I mean, the war is I think one of the purposes and goals of war is rather than kill someone, they would rather maim them because of the psychological impact it has on them and those around them. So, and they were very good at doing that with different things. So, as you'd see men get hurt, okay, for one thing, you'd wonder, when's your turn? When is it coming next? Okay. So I buried that. The other thing I buried quite well was in supply, we would, as individuals would get hurt and they would be shipped out of country back home, we would get their personal effects, and we would have to go through their personal effects and inventory it, and then pack it up and send it back to their loved ones. And that's one of the things that I did for a couple of months.
When you went out on patrol, in addition to discovering the enemy, did you discover any of their, maybe where their camp was, or where they had stored some items?
Not so much camp, but the other thing we discovered was tunnels. Okay, so we would have to go down in the tunnels and try to find, and usually that's where their storage was, is what we discovered, and that's primarily what troops, soldiers would look for, is what do they have down there, and it was usually ammunition, is where they would store their ammunition, is in the tunnels.
Did you have to go down in the tunnels?
Yeah, I weighed less than 100 pounds, so I was a prime candidate for a tunnel rat.
And when you went down, what were you thinking?
You would think a lot. You had no idea what you're going to run into. You had a flashlight, and it had a lens on it, and the lens had probably a hole about the size of a pin. So that's what that was your beam, was that pinhole. And you see usually red or green. Sometimes you'd go down, only spend a few minutes down there because it went nowhere. Other times you could spend 10, 15 minutes looking around and trying to find whatever it is.
How did you know that no one was down there when you went down, or were there people down there?
You didn't know. You had usually you went down with a 45 and a flashlight. And that's what you had for protection.
Did you ever confront the enemy?
Never. I thank God every day, never.
Let's come back to America. You have a degree.
I do.
From Bradley University in what?
In computer science.
In computer science.
Yes.
You go out and find a job?
I did. I worked for McDonnell Douglas for 7 years. From there, I went to a company called HBO and Company, not Home Box Office. It was HBO and Company. They installed computers in hospitals nationwide. And so I went to work for them for 7 years.
You had a change of heart, may I call it?
The change of heart came probably in 83, 84. About 1983, 1984 is when I had the change of heart.
What happened?
I found my faith again. I found God. God found me. Okay?
You had grown up in the Catholic faith.
As a Catholic, sure.
Did you lose your faith because of Vietnam?
I did. I didn't practice my faith after I came back from Vietnam. I'd lost my faith. I went to church. My wife was Catholic. So I went through the motions. But again, they were motions. And those of us who came back from Vietnam, we learned how to go through motions with no feelings. You can hide your feelings very well. And you have to survive, so you have to put on, as I call it, you put a front on. And you go out and you're with everybody else.
You became callous in Vietnam?
Very callous. You learn that Vietnam, one of the things we learned is life has no meaning in Vietnam. Okay? And you try to hold on to your own life as long as you can, but after a while you suddenly realize there's no meaning for you in Vietnam neither. It's just a matter of time. So you do become callous.
Too many other people dying, being hurt.
Being hurt. Right. The hurt is the worst part. The dying is bad, yes it is, but watching them go through the hurt.
Was your wife of support during this period of time, post-Vietnam up to 83?
Very much so. I could have never done it without her. So yeah, she stood by me.
And then in 83, what did you decide to do?
I was on a Cursillo weekend is what it was. I mean, it's a retreat type weekend the Catholic Church puts on. And I've heard a lot about it over the years. What's funny is people tried to tell me to go there for years, and I kept saying no, no, no. And so I did. I went there. And that was where I changed.
I'd call that more than change.
Believe me, it was. Yes.
Take me from the Cursillo weekend to the transition.
Transition of?
In terms of your profession.
Well, my profession continued. I mean, when you say I continued being a computer geek. I mean, that just continued. I got closer to God when I had this change of heart. I got closer to my family. I was a workaholic. I suddenly realized I don't need to be a workaholic anymore. Okay, there were other things in life. I started looking out around me to see what else there was in life. We had no children yet. We had been married. We got married in 1972. We had no children yet. We wanted children. Okay. I started thinking about being a deacon in the church for the first time, and where that came from, I have no idea. But it was there.
And that's what I mean by profession.
You
have taken
Yes.
your faith beyond just faith.
Yes, I have.
Tell me about what you do now.
I've been a deacon now for 18 years. I do prison ministry. So we have about 9 prisons in the Peoria Diocese that I visit periodically. When I say periodically, monthly on some of them. We do cursillos in the prisons. I'm a deacon at Holy Family Catholic Church. I'm also a deacon at St. Mary's, the cathedral. And I'm a deacon at St. Charbel Catholic Church here in Peoria. I teach what they call RCIA for those who wanting to come into the Catholic Church. So I teach that starting September through the time of Easter. Okay.
Looking back at your service in Vietnam and then coming back and burying everything, would you consider yourself a little bit lost, and now you have found yourself?
Coming back, I was lost. Yes. And probably until 83, 84, I was lost. And the diaconate program, the diaconate community gave me a purpose I never had before. Work was not fulfilling. I mean, you needed it because of a job, but was it truly fulfilling? The answer is no. Okay. I think one of the best jobs that I enjoyed was I worked for OSF Healthcare here in Peoria, Illinois. I did that for 24 years. And that's probably as close to a faith community that I could possibly get and still have a job. And that was probably one of the better things that ever happened to me.
You're Lebanese.
I am Lebanese.
And the Lebanese community in the greater Peoria area is very dedicated to service.
There.
What role did being Lebanese and your fellow Lebanese play in any aspect of your life?
After, during, whatever?
In terms of serving in Vietnam.
Okay.
and then afterwards?
I mean, they were there. They supported. The support was mail. Support was packages, not only from my family, but yeah, the extended family. Okay, I would get things. When I came back, when I would rotate back, they were there for me. They were supporting me. The thing, no one knew how to support us because we didn't know what kind of support we needed. And so, could I look at someone and say, "This is what I need"? I couldn't look at you and tell you what I needed. When I came back to Peoria the first time in December, the first time I rotated out, I got to the airport about 5 o'clock in the evening. I had no money on me. Okay, I was sitting in uniform. I had a duffel bag, and I had no money to call anybody. I didn't know how I was going to get home. Okay, so I'll never forget that. I sat next to a phone, I don't know, for a couple of hours. And finally somebody asked me, "Are you all right?" And I said, "I'm fine." And they says, "Do you need a ride home?" And I said, "Well, if I could borrow a dime, I could call somebody, but I don't have any money." And they gave me a ride home. But I didn't know to ask somebody. I needed whatever. And why I didn't know, I don't know that. But again, I was bearing a lot of things. Okay.
People who haven't been in the service in a war zone don't understand a
It's
war
true.
zone.
That's true. Never understand it.
And sometimes we who have been in a war zone don't understand the impact of a war zone.
And that is true. We still don't understand.
Now that you've had several decades to reflect back, you went through counseling, which was helpful, you found your faith. Do you look back on your service in Vietnam a little bit differently than while you were there or immediately afterward?
I do. It made me who I am today. It was part of my growth that I had to go through for whatever reason. I truly believe that what we experience in our path of life has a meaning, and it's to fulfill something else. Whether it's to help someone else, whether it's to help a situation, but God does not put us in situations that we may dislike just to put us there. He wants us to be happy. But because of the human element of this world, we create, as a whole, our own situation sometimes. And so I believe that, yeah, I do look at it differently.
And let me expand on that just a bit, if you will allow me. When you were over there, I mean, God is a loving entity.
Very much.
And yet when you were in Vietnam, did you see God loving anybody?
I did not.
How do you...
I did not.
When you look back at that, how do you justify everything that happened over there?
I can't. I can't justify what happened. And I'll never try to justify it. God was there, but we weren't there for God, is what it comes down to. Because God is always there. It's just that we don't recognize him. We don't see the situation that he's in.
Are you a better person because you served in Vietnam?
I think so. Yes. I'll give you an example. I went through depression naturally when I came back. And depression to me is what I call the bottomless pit. Okay? You just fall, and it's a free fall, and you keep falling. Okay? And you pray. You want to hit that bottom so you can at least start crawling back up. And as you don't find that bottom, you just go inside of yourself and shun out everybody else. So you put this mask around you. You build a wall around you. Okay? And so I went through that for a period of time. And I'd ask myself, why? And I'd ask God, why? Why in the hell am I going through this? I've paid the price. I've done what I can do. Why? Okay? Years later, a young lady walked in my office one day, and she expressed to me that she was totally depressed and needed help. And a light bulb went on. And that light bulb was, this is why I went through what I went through back here, my own depression, so I can help somebody else. So we sat and we talked. And her response to me was, no one has ever understood this. I looked at her and she's right. Unless you go through it, you can't understand it.
So your service in Vietnam actually was preparing you for what you're doing today.
Exactly. You know, seeing the guys, you know, I do a lot of prison ministry. Okay, and I was just there this morning. I can't envision what they go through day to day. Okay, but as I told them, my prison was 1.5 years in Vietnam. I counted the days, the weeks, the hours, the minutes, whatever it was. And I says, you know, the only thing you can hold on to is hope. And I says, that's the one thing I think I hold on to is hope. I will get out of here one day. I said, that's all you guys can hold on to is hope. You'll get out of these prisons. And as expressed to them, they're there for a purpose. They're there to be punished, okay, but they're there for other purposes. They can build a community. And I've seen Christian communities grow out of prison. Truly have seen Christian communities come out of prisons.
And they can relate, the inmates can relate to you because of the Vietnam experience?
For some reason, the answer is yes. I can talk more openly to them because of it. And as I keep telling them, I'm not trying to say I understand what you're going through, because I'll never do that to you, because yours is different, okay? Mine was different. But I can relate to, I've got time to do, and I want this time to get over, okay? I never want to see it again. And I says, from that aspect, I can hear it. So again, I think that prepared me for this.
Joe LaHood, thank you.
Thank you.